Thank you for introducing me. Yeah, as Sophie said, I'm Neil Swift, and our first slide is who am I? And today, yes, so I am a project officer for the Wessex Rivers Trust, and so my day-to-day role now is in the kind of identification, the project management, and eventually delivery of conservation projects on chalk streams in the Wessex area. Most of my work is on the River Test, and a lot of that is to do indeed with the fact that I spent 7 or 8 years working as a riverkeeper of the National Trust at Montesson Abbey. That wasn't always what I did. I've had a lifelong love of fish and fishing, and it wasn't until my mid-20s that I realised there might be a career to be made out of that. So that was when I returned to education at Sparshot College, and I was very fortunate to do my dissertation at Montesson Abbey, looking at the fish populations there. And I was even, more fortunate in the fact that at the time that I was finishing my degree, they were looking for a riverkeeper, and I was even more fortunate to get that job and spent a very happy 7 or 8 years. I think it was 8 fishing seasons, but maybe 7 years at Montesson Abbey doing that. And whilst I was there, I was managing roughly 3 miles of the Rivers Test and Dun, which are found on the wider estate. Those of you that have visited Montesson would have seen the small bit of river that runs through the abbey itself. There's actually, like I say, 3 miles or so out on the wider estate that they manage as a fishery or certainly were at the time, managing as a fishery for fly fishing. What is a riverkeeper? The place to start, with these things sometimes is to ask Google. And actually Google came up trumps here with a very reasonable dictionary definition of what a riverkeeper is. A riverkeeper is responsible for the maintenance, management and presentation of fisheries. The role includes a number of tasks, which include weed cutting, bank maintenance, managing trees, fish stocking, general security and undertaking conservation projects. What's really missing, I think, from this kind of dictionary definition is the kind of knowledge and understanding that's behind everything they do. And it's that really understanding of the river itself, the habitat, the fish that live within the river and everything that lives around the river that feeds into all of those tasks that you see there. That's kind of more of what we're going to expand on in the talk today. So before we get into the kind of meat of it, I thought it'd be interesting to look at who has a riverkeeper and why are they there? Largely, they are on estates or for working for landowners with a river that is used for fishing. In the same way that it's rare to find a gamekeeper if there's no shooting involved, it's the same with fishing and riverkeepers. I might be wrong, but I don't personally know of many, if any, riverkeepers who work where there isn't fishing. Many of them actually live on site as on the estate that they work for, which really makes it as much of a vocation for many people as it is a job. It is people's lives. Some larger estates might have a whole team of riverkeepers, with a head riverkeeper leading a team of underkeepers. And you do find a few riverkeepers who kind of work freelance, so smaller stretches of river or where there's less management that needs doing through the year. They might work across 2 or 3 different sites, or it might be part of their kind of wider countryside management job that they also look after some rivers. And then you get fishing clubs like someone like the Salisbury District Angling or Piscatorial Society, who have a team of keepers themselves that will work across different sites and different rivers that they manage. Everything in nature, as we know, is seasonal, and that means that everything in a riverkeeper's life is seasonal. I thought the best way to do this talk might be to go through a whole year in a riverkeeper's life, and we'll look at what they do throughout the seasons and how that relates to the fishing and how that relates to everything that's going on. However, we're probably going to look at it slightly differently, because I think a lot of the time when I was riverkeeping, my year felt a little bit more like this than spring, summer, autumn, winter. It felt like pre-fishing season, during the fishing season, the end of the fishing season, and winter is still winter. So that's the kind of lens that we're going to look at everything that goes on the river. So we start in pre-fishing season, and you can see that we're starting with the real glamorous stuff. Now, I should probably say before I start that riverkeeping jobs do vary from place to place, estate to state, and person to person. So people will do different amounts of different things. Some things will be maybe contracted out. Some things will be, done more in-house. And so you might talk to other river keepers who do less of this and more of that and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to give you kind of my experience of what being a river keeper was. That might be slightly different. There'll be lots of commonalities between myself and other people out there, but there also might be some differences. So pre-fishing season. We're starting our year in kind of late March and into April. The fishing season itself officially can start in April, but a lot of fisheries, especially on the test, don't really start fishing till May. It really is spring cleaning on a kind of estate level. Fishing huts, they need tidying out, they need cleaning. Like I said, this is the real glamorous stuff that you hear about all the time, I'm sure. You've got fences and gates that need painting or retreating. You've got things like paths that might need maintenance. In this case, it's respreading new chip, probably from some trees that were felled during the winter. You've got the chip and get everything looking spick and span, ready for the new season. Talking of spick and span, we also used to enjoy getting the pressure washer out on some of our boardwalks and things. It's a surprisingly satisfying job. Endless time putting chicken wire onto bridges to stop people slipping off during the fishing season. And you're probably thinking that a lot of this isn't the kind of pure nature-based stuff that you're expecting. And there is lots of that, but I think it's important to remember that, part of the river keeping world, you are essentially running a business, and people are coming to experience a place, and it's important that that place, the infrastructure within it, is both functional and also looking good. Next, it's time for the riverbanks. Whilst this starts before the fishing season starts, a lot of your summer as a river keeper will be viewed through this kind of lens, whether it's over the front of a ride-on mower or looking down the barrel of a strimmer. And that's getting the paths mowed, getting everything looking good for the start of the season. And obviously you want to avoid ending up in these kind of situations, especially at the start of the season. Banks can be wet and muddy and sticky. And one of the things I always think about these kind of photos is that a lot of river keeping life is quite solitary. You're out working on your own in the middle of the countryside. So an incident like this, best case scenario is sometimes that it's an embarrassing phone call to one of your colleagues elsewhere. And worst case scenario is a long walk back to find some kind of vehicle to drag yourself out with. So we've got everything looking spick and span, ready for the fishing season. What do we need next on a river test fishery? We need some fish. For the sake of today's talk, I'm not going to get into the weeds of stocking, good or bad, for the chalk streams. I want to give you guys a practical idea of how it happens and what goes on. So brown trout are stocked for the fishermen to catch. They're all triploid, which means they can't breed with with native fish within the river. They're transported to site, as you can see here, in what we call a fish box, and you can just about see here the oxygen cylinder in the background, keeping them all happy and safe on their travels. Some estates have their own fish farms or stew ponds. We didn't, but for a lot of river keepers, a decent amount of their time is looking after the fish that are going to be put into the river to be caught. Other estates who don't have their own fish farm will buy them in from fish farms around the region. Whenever we mention stocking to people, the first question they always have is, don't they all just swim off? How do you keep them in the river? And the answer to that is yes, they are perfectly able to swim off if they want to. But they don't immediately. And as you can see, I've just put a net full in here in this photo, and there's 10 or 12 probably all sat here. They won't just sit there permanently. They will eventually go off and find where they want to sit. And this is one of those areas where an understanding of fish behavior is really important to a riverkeeper, because you don't want them to all swim off. You want them to stay in places where they're likely to get caught by your fishermen. So How do we try and do that? Well, these stocked fish are relatively large for a trout. They prefer slower, deeper water. So you need to put them in areas where they're likely to stay. If you put them all into a fast, shallow riffle, they're all going to head straight off. Sometimes you can use that to your advantage. So if you have maybe a riffle with a pool either side of it, you know that if you put them into that riffle, some of them are going to go upstream, some of them are going to go downstream and stay in their pools. So it's really about understanding where fish are likely to stay. In this particular example, this water is probably a little bit shallow for most of these guys to stay, but directly downstream, you've got a pool with some lovely overhanging trees that they're going to find attractive. Upstream, you've got very similar. You've got a deeper run and then another deeper pool. So I can be confident that when I put the fish here, the majority of them are going to stay roughly in that area. Different fisheries have different kind of stocking patterns. There's places that just stock once at the start of the season. We always found that drip feeding them in over the season was the best way to go. You kind of that way you minimise the number of stocked fish in the beat at any one time, and for us that worked the best. So we've got our fishery looking good. We've got some fish in the river ready for the fishermen. We are ready for the fishing season to start. And that means that as a river keeper, the peace and tranquility that you've enjoyed over the winter and the spring is shattered by fishermen arriving. As you can see from this catch return card, there's far more to fishing for the fishermen than just catching fish. You see these guys have caught one brown trout to about 2.5 pounds on a hawthorn. So start of the season, the hawthorn flies around in kind of April. But they've also enjoyed some beers and some wine. They've got a suntan, and it's a job well done. I think when I say that there's more to fishing than that, it's not just beers and a bottle of wine. People enjoy the tranquility. They enjoy the nature and everything around. And part of the experience of coming fishing is often a chat with the river keeper. So whilst you can't get round and visit every single fisherman that comes, you go and talk to them, and you can help them out with all sorts of things. Again, using knowledge of the river. So what flies are hatching is a really important thing for them to know. Like as a river keeper, it will become second nature. You know what's going to be hatching, almost whether you've seen it or not, because you know the conditions you like, you know what the time of year is, but you probably will have seen what's going on. And sometimes the year it's really obvious. Obviously, we've got the mayfly here, and you'll see these come off in great swarms, and no one's going to miss it. But a lot of the rest of the year, such hatches can be more subtle. They can be very time dependent specifically. So a lot of the year, your message to fishermen would be stay late into the evening, because that's when the best hatches are going to be. That's when the fish are going to be most likely to feed. And all of this advice, then feeds into what flies they're using, tackle and tactics. The river keeper is kind of the expert here, helping the fisher folk get the most out of their time on the fishery. You've got the mixture of kind of people who fish there all the time, and you've got these people who maybe just bought a day ticket and that's their one special day for the year. So you really want to ensure that they can get the most out of it. You're also going to help them out with perhaps where the best places on the stretch of river, or the beat as we'd call it. There's areas that are going to hold more fish, and you can point them towards those. And like I say, it's really about trying to help your fishermen get the most out of their day. And I know there's river keepers out there that over the winter will run kind of masterclasses for their fishermen who come regularly, who again trying to just give them the skills to get the most out of their fishing, with tips like, if you can't see what's hatching, the spider's webs are a fantastic place to see what was hatching the day before. Moving on from talking to our rods and generally helping them out with their fishing, the next really important summer job during the fishing season for riverkeeper is going to be fringe management. So the marginal fringe is the bit of grass and other plants between the river and the path. It's the edge of the river, essentially. And it's important to appreciate just how important the marginal fringe is. it's extremely diverse area in terms of the types and variety of plants that grow there. It provides a buffer to the river in terms of trapping silt and stuff, sediment that might get washed from the land into the river. It provides a corridor for small mammals, voles, water voles, even otters will use the marginal fringe to potter around in. So it's really an important part of the river. But for the purpose of fishing, it does need to be managed. It can grow incredibly tall, and those of you that have tried fly fishing will know that casting can be difficult at the best of times. So with 5-6 feet of marginal fringe in front of you, it can become quite difficult. And there's some fishermen out there that love that kind of challenge, and that's their kind of fishing. But on the chalk streams, and specifically the test, most of the fishermen require or prefer a more managed fringe. So again, as a river keeper, it's understanding the importance of the fringe and therefore trying to manage it in a way that minimizes how much you're cutting. So there's areas that you might choose not to cut at all. Like, as you can see, this area of all the lovely meadow sweets in front of me, I've left. And then you can see over in the back here, kind of straight tops to the sedges and the reeds here suggest that has been cut. And I'll give you an example. What we've got is this bit here, which I've cut really quite short. You've then all got this lovely stuff here that I haven't cut. And again, you can see on the far bank, it remains completely uncut. And what I was looking to do here is to allow access to the areas where fish are most likely to sit. So that they can be cast towards. So we've got two main areas in this spot where the fish would sit. You've got under the tree here. Obviously, the fish love the overhead cover. And you've also got this area here in the lee of the inside of the bend, again, where fish would line up down here. So this bit, by cutting this bit short, I enable fishermen to access over here and over here. But that's all I've cut. I haven't gone and cut the rest of it down. There's actually a path on the far bank here that allows fishermen who perhaps are a little bit more adventurous to fish somewhere that's got a bank that hasn't been cut. And this bit here, there's really no need to cut it. If people want to cast to here from over here, they can do. If they want to cast up here from over here, they can do. So where there's no need to cut things, it's really best not to. And I think that's probably the way that most keepers, I would hope, go about it. I think the other thing to point out about a lot of this kind of practical work during the season is the early mornings. Your fishermen, generally arrive somewhere between 9 and 10 in the morning, and all of this work has to be done before they arrive. So certainly 2 to 3 mornings a week, I would be in work for 6 o'clock. You probably wouldn't have been able to tell a teenage me that I would enjoy getting out of bed and doing anything at 6 o'clock in the morning, but rolling around on the mower or with the strimmer at in the beautiful countryside at that time in the morning was really very enjoyable. And I think this is kind of, for me, sums up why another reason why it's wonderful to try and leave specific plants and things, just the beautiful colours that you find in the riverside bank. And again, you can see that I've cut a little window here so that people can see into this pool, but specifically leaving this beautiful purple loosestrife. June, and weed cut. As a photo I call the Grim Keeper. As you can guess, this is a scythe, and weed cut happens on the test every June, July, and August. You get 10 days in June, then slightly shorter in July and August. I think it's 6 days, 7 days. Everyone on the river cuts at the same time. So weed floating downstream doesn't disturb the fishing of the people downstream. So everyone, you can buy fishing during weed cut, but it's generally at a discounted price because the chances are that weed will float downstream and disturb your fishing whilst you're there. It's mostly still done by hand with a scythe, although there are deeper sections, especially on the main test, that they do with a weed cutting boat. Weed cutting on other rivers is slightly different. I think the Kennet, for example, keepers cut gradually through the season and remove their own weed from the river. On the test, it all floats down to the weed boom at Great Bridge, and Environment Agency hoik it all out there. Tools of the trade are a lovely sharp scythe. You've got your whetstones there for sharpening it up. Although I have to admit that often in reality, I would use an angle grinder to sharpen up a load of scythes at the start of the day and then swap them out during the day. So here's some lovely ranunculus growing on this, actually on the River Dun. Growing conditions in the chalk streams are absolutely perfect for weed growth. You know, they've got all the nutrients they need. We've got clear water, so the sun really penetrates, so they get lots of light. And this can cause some difficulties that we have some practical reasons for needing to cut the weed. It's really useful for controlling water levels. So weed growth in some places is so great that it raises the water level enough that you could be flooding areas upstream. From a fishing point of view, as you could probably guess, there's no way of fishing this piece of river at the moment. You need some clear water to cast onto. Additionally, it makes it possible to clear down everyone else's weed. So if I didn't cut any weed here, it would be very difficult for then the weed that floats downstream to get it down and off onto the next estate. I have to say, weed cut was one of my favourite times of the year. It's really an opportunity to kind of craft your river. When you cut the weed on a spot like this, you're diversifying the flow. You're creating areas that fish are likely to fly, to lie. If we had flying fish on the test, that would be something. But create areas that they're likely to lie. It's a really enjoyable thing to do. It's one of those things that's kind of hard work and relaxing in almost equal measure, I think. But we also have to be careful. It's important to remember that weed, especially something like ranunculus, really beneficial to the river and contains a huge amount of life. If anyone's ever picked up a handful of ranunculus, you'll see it crawling with different invertebrates. So it's very important not to cut too much. And some areas you're going to have to cut more. Some areas you can completely avoid cutting. And really, throughout the fishery, you're looking to create this kind of mosaic of habitats. So, looking to maintain diversity. This photo happens to be a before photo, and this is the after photo. So in terms of not cutting too much, I think we've still probably got greater than 50. We've gone from 100% coverage to probably 50% coverage of weed on the gravels. And you can see that what I've tried to do is kind of leave individual blocks of weed. And in the riverkeeping world, this is kind of known as a checkerboard. It's not quite a traditional checkerboard, which would look very much like, you can imagine, a checkers board. But trying to leave these kind of patches of weed that what you're doing is you're allowing the water to flow through and around and creating these diverse flow patterns throughout this little section. A couple more just examples of weed cutting for you. Another area with lots of ranunculus. Again, this was a stretch that for me the main reason for cutting this was to enable me to get everyone else's weed downstream at the end. It would have just been fairly impossible without it. So again, you can see, I've left a very decent, probably 60 or 70% of the weed here is what's left. We've left some lovely white flowering ranunculus on the surface, but we've now got enough of a clear channel that we're going to be able to clear down weed at the end of it. And I'll show you some clear down photos shortly, and you'll see exactly what I mean by really needing to do this to get everyone else's weed downstream as well. Another example here. This was an area where I used weed cutting again, a little bit more subtly. This was the top of this is an inside bend on this side, on my left-hand side of the screen. It used to get very clogged up with weed and virtually dry out during the summer months. So by not cutting this side of the river, but putting a bit of a checkerboard into this side of the river, I could improve the flow over this side. and keep that part of the river flowing nicely. So on to clear down. We've switched from a scythe to a muck rake, or a chrome as it's sometimes called, and you can see all of the weed that's floating downstream. Clear down happens over 2 days at the end of the weed cut, and it happens in sequence, starting at the upstream end and finishing at the downstream end, which is the weed boom down at Great Bridge that I mentioned earlier. It happens in sequence because there's no good you clearing your weed down and then someone from upstream dumping a load more weed downstream. And communication is really key in this. So it should be really simple in that you finish clearing your weed down, you give your downstream neighbour a call, you say, "I finished clearing the weed down." They continue clearing the weed down from the top of their beat. It doesn't always quite work out like that, and at least a couple of times during my time, I've had to clear down various stretches more than once. How that happens, nobody knows, because it's never anyone's fault. It's never clear down without a blockage or two. This is the River Dun again, and you can really see what I mean about the sheer amount of weed that comes downstream. You can see the swan in the distance there, just to give you an idea of that there is a river under there somewhere. And what you can't see is there's actually like a relatively small branch that sticks out just around the corner here, that one bit of weed catches up on, and then another bit catches up on it, and then another, and before you know it, it looks like this. That's a good couple of hours unpicking that. It's not, well, I say it's not a huge amount of fun. Almost everything you do as a river keeper is at least some form of fun. More weed blockages. This is another one on one of the test beats where it's caught around the bridge here, getting back on the River Dun. And in Mottisfont Abbey Gardens itself, if you've ever been there, you will probably recognise this bridge. It's the one you walk in. This was the day we almost flooded the Abbey Gardens because the entire bridge was blocked up. That was another one where it was fun, and doing it through the Abbey Gardens, you always have the extra fun of being watched by a crowd from the bridge. So moving on, I was just saying that everything river keepers do is somewhat fun. I'm actually going to move on to a part that isn't particularly fun at all, and that's poaching. So part of a river keeper's job is site security. I had to look through my photos to find a photo of poachers that did not have a face in it or anything like that. You do have to deal with poachers and countryside crime as a river keeper. It's something that river keepers shouldn't really have to deal with, but they do. The countryside police are woefully underfunded and under-resourced, so it's often, almost always, left keepers to deal with these situations alone. You know, most beats will have several instances over the course of a season. I think we were probably relatively lucky at Mottisfont in that, you know, it's relatively populated with the Abbey being there, like maybe less of a target, but other keepers I know get it very regularly. My general tactic was to just make sure nothing escalated, make it as boring for them as possible, inform them that they're not allowed to be there and that it's time to go. And in reality, most of the time they do. I think they generally understand that whilst poaching isn't seen as particularly serious by the police, escalating that into assault or a bigger argument would be far more serious. And the reality is, a lot of the time, they will leave one place, drive upstream, and go and bother another keeper, which is a shame. And this is the cost of poaching. You know, those guys that are walking around the corner there, he ditched his fishing rod into the, they often use very, very cheap fishing rods so they can just ditch them if need be. Ditched the rod into the bushes when he thought I wasn't looking, and told me he wasn't fishing. And you go around the corner and here's 2 dead fish. And in this case, it's 2 stockies, but they're not discerning between stockfish and wild fish. So you know, it really, there is a cost to it, and there's a further cost in terms of, you know, the effect it has on legitimate fishermen's days if they're disturbed by people who shouldn't be there. Unfortunately, countryside crime goes beyond the river, and this is from another thing that I know numerous river keepers up and down the river will see each year. And the day before, there would have been strimmers and chainsaws and all sorts, all of which we were actually very lucky on this occasion. They were disturbed in the process. They'd actually hot-wired one of our Land Rovers, filled it full of everything, and thankfully the police had arrived, alerted by one of our neighbours, just before they were able to make a getaway. So it's yeah, not one of the fun bits of the job, but I did want to highlight it because I think it's an important part of what riverkeepers do, is dealing with these kind of things. So we've flown through the season there. I think we're just about on target time-wise. And we're at the end of the fishing season, which of course means it's time for a lovely cup of coffee outside the fishing hut. Or so you might think, but no. So we've reached the end of the fishing season for some. Others have a grayling fishing season. Grayling fishing can continue right through the winter. So for some river keepers, there'll be a continuation of that. Bankside management and maintenance tends to be more relaxed. After all, it's winter, so nothing's growing. So it's not quite as work intensive, but it still means that there's fishermen around throughout the winter for some fisheries. Similarly, some fisheries offer pike fishing over the winter. It's important that pike aren't pressured too much. So I think there's some places that just do a limited number of days for their pike fishing. But more importantly than fishing comes time for conservation work. I'd say 99% of the projects that I do now with the Wessex Rivers Trust involve working with river keepers. We always, where possible, want river keepers to work on projects with us. Whether it's stuff they're doing off their own back, or whether that's stuff that we're helping them with, or we're funding, or helping to find funding for, river keepers play a huge role in the conservation and enhancement of our rivers. Projects, they can range from small woody projects, like this one in particular is we're just getting a couple of logs from the wood to go into the river to kick flow around, essentially simulate somewhat of a fallen tree. Another example of some small work is the hinging in of this willow that will regrow, and again is constricting the channel down here slightly to improve flow rates, helping grow some reeds out down here. This one is a brushwood mattress with that again will collect silt and reed up in time, also providing some protection on the outside of this bend here. But they can go right through to major works. So here we had contractors removing a weir on the Moss Swamp fishery. This is just upstream from there, putting gravel in. This was a stretch that was historically had been dredged, or perhaps just dug too deep, and we put a new gravel bed in. This was the aftershock for that, so planted up with ranunculus as well. And the key thing about all of this work, both for river keepers and myself in my current role, is that it all has to be done by the end of November at the latest. And why is that? Because it's spawning time. For those of you that don't recognise this is a trout red, where the trout have essentially made their nest in the gravel, and the eggs are laid into this. And really, this means that it's time to get out of the river. It's time to let it all be, let nature take its course for the rest of the winter. So we're now into the winter. It's another time where what goes on specific fisheries will depend very much on what they've got to do and what maintenance there is to be done, what other projects around the river there are to be done. So I was just going to give you a few examples of bits and pieces from my time. We did some hedge laying, again, one of those lovely countryside activities that has fantastic ecological benefits, and had a fantastic volunteer who was very good at it. So he led this for us. It was really very nice piece of work. Other things around the fishery to try and enhance what we've got. So this was an area of kind of scrubland on the edge of the woodland that was adjacent to one of our fishing huts that we turned into a bit of an extension for the kind of garden area to give fishermen a lovely garden area. Sometimes things go wrong during the fishing season that need correcting by the time when you get to the winter. So this was we came in one morning to discover that one of the bridges had collapsed, and it's very nice to be able to replace that. Sometimes you can't do everything yourself. This was a fishing hut on the main beat that had some structural issues, mostly because I think they decided to build a very heavy hut on peat ground some time ago. But we had contractors, specialist conservation builders in who literally put the roof up on stilts and then took it to pieces, piece by piece, before repairing the bits that needed repairing and putting it back together again, having then laid a new foundation underneath. It was fantastic. And then there's other fishery things like, so, some places, if you want to get enable fishermen to get to the bank, but you don't want them trampling over this lovely fen habitat, you can use boardwalks. Again, this is some stuff that I built in my case with help of National Trust volunteers. And a lot of your winter is spent doing things like this, alongside things like tree work, which you don't want to do during bird nesting season, so it happens during the winter. And the other part of winter really is dealing with nature. This is actually a photo from the 2013-14 floods. I think this is from January or March 2014. Part of that for river keepers is managing sluices and hatches. Anyone who's seen the chalk streams, or specifically the River Test, really from above, if you look on Google Maps, you'll see it's a myriad of different channels, and they're all often interconnected by more channels, and those are generally managed, the flow of water between them, by sluices. And they're a way of shifting water around, basically. So there's some places where river keepers will need to manage sluices throughout the fishing season, even maintaining water levels in river channel, or pushing water into different carriers to enable, maybe they've got fishing there, maybe they just need more water there for one reason or another. And keeping tabs on how much water is where and what you can do. Like this particular sluice was very important for not flooding the bottom of the Abbey Gardens. Here we've got a double whammy of flood and tree and river. And again, trees falling into the river is another thing that has to be dealt with. Sometimes a conservation-minded riverkeeper can find a way to keep a tree in the river in some way, make some great habitat. But obviously you can see that this one is not going to be possible to leave something that large and that directly across the flow. I've got so many examples of these. I've only put a few in, but it always feels like every winter you spend as much time in the river with a chainsaw that you do doing much else. I think it's again one of those parts of the job that I'd highlight, that whilst I had other National Trust ranger staff or volunteers that could help me with these things, there's a lot of keepers out there who do work on their own and might have to take something like this on their own. There is also a great camaraderie between a lot of the river keepers, and that people will go and help each other when they are in need. But yeah, it's something that a lot of keepers will have to deal with. Here's another one. Thankfully, it went into the river rather than onto the train line that's directly behind. So that's kind of got us through a year in the life of the riverkeeper. I wanted to go finally onto something that's been more of a development in recent times. The riverkeepers have always been a voice for the river, but they've really taken that to a new level, I think, in the last 6 months or so, both through social media and through direct action, essentially in forms of protests. Have really been taking Southern Water particularly. I know it's been happening elsewhere on the Kennet. There's been some fantastic work from the keepers there, really bringing to the public attention what's been going on with pollution. I'm sure everyone's seen in the news, scandal essentially, of our water companies spewing sewage into the rivers. And it's this advocacy for and guardianship of the chalk streams that's really incredibly valuable part of what the river keepers do. They've been taking it upon themselves to increase the amount of of water testing that's going on, and then publicising that, making sure that, you know, through social media, people know what's going on and really drawing attention not just to what's going on, but the negative effects of it. And I think they probably are really the best placed people to be telling us that. They see things day to day. They know what the river's like. They know what it should be like, and they know what it shouldn't be like. So it's been fantastic to see. And this particular protest had several hundred people outside Fullerton wastewater treatment works, and it was heartening to see so many people there, and all of it organised by the Hampshire Riverkeepers Association. So it's fantastic to see that. So for a long time, the riverkeepers up and down the test have been doing the river fly sampling. Is my volunteer John, who always helped me out with that. What this is really good for is showing long-term trends. But what it doesn't do is show you those flash incidents that we're often talking about when it comes to the damage done by sewage going into the river. So by CSOs, you know, they come on when they're supposed to only come on when stormwater comes. We all know it's more often than that. But what they're now looking at is, again, increasing water quality monitoring on the test. And again, this is something that has been called for by the riverkeepers. The Test and Inch Association are looking to implement it. And yeah, this kind of advocacy and getting taking Southern Water to task has been fantastic to see. If you're really interested in the world of river keeping, Instagram is full of people who've been on the river essentially their whole lives there, some of them, and they're good enough to share their day-to-day life with everyone. Sometimes it's the funny side of it, sometimes it's the frustrating side of it, sometimes it's just nice pictures of fish, which someone like myself thoroughly appreciates. But I would thoroughly recommend these guys, and there's plenty more out there as well. If you search riverkeeping or riverkeeper on Instagram, so apologies to if there's anyone I've forgotten who should be on that list. There undoubtedly is. So yeah, I think that was about me. I guess we've got some time for questions.